The desert stretched for miles, a vast open graveyard of sand and scrub, where the wind howled like the ghosts of the dead. The sun had started to dip beyond the horizon, casting the sky in hues of deep orange and blood red. The heat had not faded. It never did in this part of the country. The air was still thick, suffocating, as if the land itself was warning her to leave. But Agent Natalie Reyes wasn't the type to run. She adjusted her grip on her Glock 19, scanning the dirt road ahead. The radio on her shoulder crackled to life, but she ignored it. She knew she was alone. Her CBP unit had called it a night hours ago, leaving her to handle one last patrol along a known smuggling route. A truck had been spotted just outside her checkpoint, a lone vehicle crawling across the border like a vulture over a dying carcass. It had pulled off the road and disappeared into the desert. Natalie wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what this was, a test. The cartel had been running drugs and bodies through this stretch of land for months, trying to push deeper, using the endless desert to slip through unnoticed. They had lost shipments, men, and money because of her. She had shut down their safe houses, intercepted their couriers, and led a handful of midnight raids that cost them millions. And now, they wanted her gone. She exhaled slowly, pulling her truck to a stop just outside an abandoned gas station. A skeleton of a building, rotted and forgotten by time. The last drop of fuel had been pumped here decades ago, but it still stood, its broken windows glinting under the dying light of the sun. The perfect place for an ambush. Natalie knew it was coming before she even stepped out of the truck. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end, a cold familiarity creeping into her bones. She had felt this before, back when she was still Special Forces, deep in enemy territory, walking into a trap with no way out. Except this time, she wasn't taking orders. She was setting the trap. She reached for the rifle mounted on the passenger seat and grabbed the extra magazine from her vest. The movements were second nature, fluid, precise. She wasn't just a border agent. She'd spent years in the Middle East, hunting men who thought they were untouchable. Now she was doing the same thing. Except these bastards weren't hiding in caves. They were right here. She climbed out of the truck, moving slow, calculated, her boots crunching against the dry gravel. The silence was deafening. No birds, no insects. Just the low whistle of the wind. Her eyes locked onto the footprints in the dirt leading into the gas station. Fresh. They were inside, waiting. She stepped forward, weapon raised, every sense on fire. The air was thick with the scent of oil and rust, the last remnants of a place long abandoned. Shadows flickered inside, shifting behind broken glass and crumbling walls. Then, a noise. A whisper of movement, a boot scuffing against the floor. 3, maybe 4 of them, armed, close. Natalie exhaled through her nose, tightening her grip on her rifle. They thought she was alone. They thought she was just another agent. They had no idea what they were walking into. The first shot came from behind her. A rifle cracked, the round ripping through the side mirror of her truck, shattering glass. A warning shot. A scare tactic. Natalie didn't flinch. She pivoted fast, raising her rifle as a figure emerged from the desert, stepping out from behind the ruins of a rusted-out truck. He was tall, dressed in dark fatigues, his face half covered by a red bandana. A cartel enforcer with cheap body armor and a stolen rifle. He grinned, showing rotting teeth, and whistled. "Look at you, little border cop," he sneered in Spanish, his voice thick with amusement. "Walking into our backyard all by yourself. Bad idea." Natalie didn't move, didn't blink. She could hear 2 more men inside the gas station, shifting, adjusting their grip on their weapons. A 4th was somewhere behind the broken fence, positioning himself for a flank. 4 targets. Not a problem. The enforcer took a step forward, raising his rifle lazily. "You should drop your gun, chica. Maybe we let you..." Natalie shot him through the face. The suppressor on her rifle hissed as the bullet tore through his skull, the force of it snapping his head back before his body hit the ground. The others reacted instantly, shouting, scrambling. But she was already moving. She turned, stepping sideways just as gunfire erupted from the station, bullets slicing through the air where she had been standing a second ago. She dropped low, rolling behind the truck for cover as dust and shrapnel flew in all directions. Her heartbeat didn't spike. Her breathing stayed steady. This was what she did. This was what she was made for. Another cartel gunman made the mistake of stepping into the open, rushing toward her truck with his rifle raised, too slow. Natalie popped up from cover and fired 2 rounds, center mass. The force of it lifted him off his feet, his body crumpling against the pavement. The last 2 were still inside. She could hear them panicking now, shouting orders, trying to regroup. They weren't trained soldiers, just thugs with guns, used to fighting people who ran when they fired. Natalie didn't run. She moved fast, ducking low as she made her way around the back of the gas station. The cartel men inside had no idea she was already flanking them. She pressed herself against the outer wall, listening. One of them was on his radio, calling for backup. She didn't give him the chance to finish. Natalie turned the corner and fired. 1 shot, 2 shots. The man holding the radio jerked violently, the rounds punching through his ribcage, his body slamming against the shelves behind him. The other enforcer panicked, spinning toward her, but his hands were shaking. He fumbled with his weapon. She fired once. The bullet hit him in the knee. He screamed, dropping his gun, his hands grasping at the wound. Natalie stepped forward, her shadow falling over him as he gasped in pain. His eyes were wide with fear. "Por favor," he croaked. "Please." She stared at him, her rifle aimed at his head. No mercy, no hesitation. "You shouldn't have come here," she said coldly. She pulled the trigger. The last cartel enforcer dropped, his body motionless. Natalie stood there for a moment, her breath steady, the bodies around her silent. It was over. She exhaled, lowered her rifle, and turned toward the rising sun. They had thought she was just another border agent. They had no clue who they were dealing with. The bodies lay still in the dust, their blood mixing with the sand, darkening under the growing light of dawn. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the air, the last echoes of Natalie Reyes's rifle shots fading into the emptiness of the desert. She stood over them, rifle lowered but ready, scanning the perimeter, waiting for another sound, another threat. But there was nothing. Only the wind cutting through the open land, whistling past the abandoned gas station like an old, forgotten ghost. Natalie exhaled slowly. 4 down. But there were always more. She knew this wasn't over. The moment the first man had raised his rifle against her, this had stopped being a cartel smuggling operation and had turned into something else, a war, a personal one. She glanced at the dead cartel soldier who had been calling for backup before she dropped him. The radio was still in his grip, a soft static hissing from the speaker. His last words had been desperate, rushed, but someone had heard them. Someone was coming. She kneeled beside his body and snatched the radio from his lifeless fingers, clicking the side button. "Agent Reyes," a voice crackled through the frequency. A voice she recognized. Her grip on the radio tightened. "Jenkins!" "Jesus Christ, Reyes, what the hell did you just do?" His voice was low, urgent, layered with something between panic and admiration. "They made a move first," Natalie said flatly, scanning the horizon. "They thought they were hunting me." She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "They didn't know they walked into an ambush." Jenkins exhaled through the speaker. "Yeah, well, you just set off a damn bomb in their backyard. I've been picking up chatter. They know it was you, and they're coming." Natalie didn't flinch. She had been waiting for this. "How many?" she asked, already moving, checking the weapons on the dead men, reloading from their spare magazines. "Enough that you won't make it out if you stay put," Jenkins warned. "At least 2 SUVs heading your way now, full of men who won't be as sloppy as these idiots. If I were you, I'd be gone already." Natalie smirked, tossing an extra Glock magazine into her vest. "I'm not you, Jenkins." A heavy pause. "Yeah, that's what worries me." She clicked off the radio and pocketed it. Her heart rate hadn't changed. This wasn't new. This wasn't unexpected. This was what she had been trained for, what she had spent years perfecting. The art of fighting back. The art of hunting those who thought they were untouchable. She moved quickly, pulling the dead cartel enforcer's body to the edge of the broken gas station doorway, propping him up against the frame. From a distance, he would look alive. A distraction. The others she left where they lay. They would be a message. She sprinted toward her truck, crouching low as she moved, keeping her head down, her senses alert. The sound of engines roaring in the distance made her pulse quicken. Not from fear, but from the cold, familiar adrenaline that always came before a fight. She reached her truck, but she didn't climb in. She wasn't going to run, not yet. Instead, she opened the driver's side door, grabbing a small metal case from beneath the seat. She popped it open, revealing a set of detonators and explosives, the kind she had used in her past life. The kind she had buried deep when she left the military, thinking she wouldn't need them again. She had been wrong. She set 2 small C4 charges along the side of the gas station, placing them carefully where the concrete walls were weakest. She had just finished when she saw the first set of headlights cutting through the dark desert road. The first SUV, moving fast. Showtime. Natalie sprinted to the side of the gas station, keeping low, her rifle ready. She pressed her back against the wall and took a deep breath, steadying herself. The SUV skidded to a stop in front of the station, dust rising around the tires. The doors flew open and men poured out. 6, maybe 7, moving fast, spreading out, rifles raised. "Pedro!" one of them shouted, searching the bodies. "Where the hell is everyone?" Another man moved toward the station entrance, his rifle aimed. "They're dead," he muttered, shaking his head. "All of them." One of them stepped forward, lowering his gun slightly, eyes scanning the area. He was older, taller. The way he carried himself told her he was in charge. He had seen combat before. He wasn't just some cartel grunt. Natalie knew exactly who he was. Luis Ortega, one of the cartel's top enforcers. The kind of man who didn't take orders. He gave them. She had killed his men. Now, he was here to kill her. "Search everything," Ortega ordered. His voice was calm, steady. Too steady. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't afraid. That meant he wasn't alone. Natalie tightened her grip on the detonator in her pocket. They had no idea she was still here. The second SUV appeared in the distance, kicking up a cloud of dust as it sped toward them. Time to move. Natalie raised her rifle and fired one precise shot, hitting the first man in the throat before he even knew what hit him. Chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded in the air. Cartel enforcers shouting orders, scrambling for cover. They didn't know where she was. That was her advantage. She pressed the detonator. The explosion tore through the gas station, sending a shockwave of fire and debris into the air. The force of it ripped through the first SUV, flipping it onto its side. The men closest to the blast were thrown backward, some hitting the ground limp, others screaming in pain. Natalie was already moving. She sprinted through the smoke, using the confusion to take down 2 more enforcers, firing clean, controlled shots. One in the chest, another in the head. Ortega was still standing, shouting orders, his face a mask of fury. He turned, locking eyes with her through the haze. His rage turned into something else. Recognition. "You!" he snarled. Natalie didn't hesitate. She fired. Ortega dove behind cover, barely avoiding the shot. He reached for his radio. "Kill her!" he roared. "Now!" The second SUV slammed to a stop, more men pouring out, but they weren't just cartel. These were mercenaries, well-trained, well-armed, professionals. Natalie's stomach tightened. This wasn't just an ambush anymore. This was an execution. She had to move. Now she sprinted toward her truck, sliding across the hood as bullets shredded the air around her. She reached for the driver's side door. The truck exploded. The shockwave sent her flying, her body hitting the ground hard, pain erupting in her ribs. Smoke and fire filled the sky as the cartel's men closed in. Natalie groaned, rolling onto her side, her vision blurred. She could hear Ortega's voice, getting closer. "Find her body," he ordered. "I want to see her dead." Natalie gritted her teeth, blood dripping from her temple. She reached for her pistol, her fingers shaking. This wasn't over. Not even close. Pain tore through Natalie's ribs as she pushed herself up from the dirt, the heat from the burning truck searing the side of her face. Smoke billowed into the night sky, thick and acrid, curling around the wreckage like a living thing. The explosion had rattled her bones, sent her ears ringing, but it hadn't killed her. The cartel wasn't that lucky. The taste of blood coated her tongue as she rolled onto her back, forcing her breath to slow. Her vision blurred for a second before snapping back into focus. She was still in the fight. The gunfire had died down for a moment, but she could hear Ortega's men moving closer, their voices sharp, laced with anticipation. "She's dead," one of them said, stepping toward the flaming wreck. Ortega's voice came next, low and angry. "You don't know that? Find the body." Natalie forced herself to stay still, blinking through the dust and debris. They thought they'd won. That was their mistake. They had no idea who they were hunting. She counted the footsteps. 3 men moving in. Ortega hung back, giving orders, keeping himself safe. A coward like all the others. Her fingers curled around the pistol strapped to her thigh. The heat from the explosion had warped the metal, but it was still loaded, still deadly. She adjusted her grip, feeling the weight of it in her palm. One of the cartel enforcers stepped closer, boots kicking up dust as he scanned the wreckage. He was cocky, too sure of himself. He leaned down, reaching toward the rubble. Natalie struck. Her arm snapped up, the pistol's muzzle pressing against his throat. His eyes widened, the moment of realization hitting him just before she pulled the trigger. The gun barked once, the suppressed round punching through his neck. Blood sprayed as he staggered back, gurgling, clutching at the wound. The other 2 barely had time to react before Natalie was already moving. She rolled to the side, dodging the first burst of gunfire, slipping into the shadows between the wreckage and the desert brush. "She's alive!" one of them shouted. "Mierda! Find her!" Natalie didn't wait for them to regroup. She was already behind them. The second man turned too late, his rifle raised in panic. She fired twice, the rounds hitting center mass, dropping him where he stood. The last man flinched, scrambling backward, his hands shaking as he fired blindly into the smoke. Natalie stayed low, closing the distance before he could adjust. She hit him hard, her boot slamming into his knee. The crack of bone filled the air as he collapsed with a scream. His rifle fell from his grip. She didn't hesitate. Her knife was already in her hand before he could beg. The blade sliced clean across his throat, cutting off his scream before it could fully form. The bodies hit the ground in a matter of seconds. Natalie exhaled slowly, wiping blood from her face. 3 down, but Ortega was still standing. She turned toward the sounds of movement in the distance. Ortega wasn't stupid. He wouldn't rush in. He would be waiting, watching to see if she had truly survived. She used that to her advantage. She reloaded quickly, grabbing spare magazines off the dead men. Her movements were smooth, controlled. This was just another mission. The same muscle memory that had kept her alive in war zones for years took over, guiding her every step. Then she heard it. The roar of engines. Ortega's men weren't alone. Natalie spun, her eyes catching the glow of headlights in the distance, dust rising from the road leading toward the gas station. 2 more SUVs moving fast. Reinforcements. She clicked her radio. "Jenkins," she said, her voice sharp, focused. The reply came almost instantly. "You're still breathing?" "For now." She checked her ammo. "I need an extraction, now." Jenkins cursed. "I told you to run." "I don't run." Silence. Then, "All right, I'll get eyes on you. ETA 10 minutes. Can you hold?" Natalie glanced at the approaching SUVs, then at Ortega, who was now moving, his remaining men following close behind. They thought they were closing in on her. She smirked. "Yeah," she said. "I can hold." She moved before they could react, sprinting toward the burned-out husk of an abandoned semi-truck on the far side of the gas station. It was rusted through, its windows shattered, but it provided cover. And more importantly, it still had fuel. She grabbed a spare magazine, loaded it, then took aim at the truck's fuel tank. The first SUV skidded to a stop near the gas station, its doors flying open. Men poured out, guns ready. Natalie fired. The bullet ripped through the fuel tank, igniting the fumes. The explosion was instant. Flames erupted into the sky, a shockwave tearing through the ground. The SUV was caught in the blast, flipping sideways as its occupants were thrown like rag dolls. The second SUV veered off course, tires screeching as it spun wildly, trying to avoid the fireball. Natalie didn't waste time. She ran, weaving through the chaos, picking off survivors with clean, methodical shots. Ortega's men were scrambling now, confused, disoriented. But Ortega? He wasn't running. Natalie caught sight of him through the flames, his eyes locked on hers. For the first time, he wasn't smirking. He was angry. He lifted his radio, shouting something she couldn't hear. Then he turned, sprinting toward the one vehicle still intact, a reinforced truck, bulletproof glass, armored plating. Natalie cursed under her breath. He was getting away. She sprinted after him, firing as she ran, but her bullets bounced off the reinforced steel. Ortega slammed the door shut, the engine roaring to life. The truck tore away from the scene, kicking up dust as it sped toward the highway. Natalie skidded to a stop, breathing hard, watching the taillights disappear into the darkness. The fight wasn't over, not yet. She clicked her radio. "Jenkins," she said, "I need a vehicle." "You let him get away?" Jenkins sounded amused. Natalie exhaled. "Not for long." She glanced back at the wreckage behind her. The burning SUVs, the dead cartel enforcers. Ortega had thought he could kill her. Now she was going to hunt him down. The night air was thick with the scent of burning fuel, metal, and blood. The flickering flames from the wreckage cast eerie shadows across the desert floor as Natalie Reyes stood among the bodies, her breathing steady despite the chaos she had just survived. The battle was over, but the war wasn't. She could still see Ortega's truck disappearing into the darkness, kicking up dust as it sped away. The bastard was running. He knew what was coming for him now. Natalie clicked her radio. "Jenkins, tell me you've got eyes on that truck." A crackle of static, then Jenkins' voice came through, sharp and focused. "I've got him. Blacked out truck heading south on a dirt road, moving fast. Looks like he's trying to reach the highway." Natalie was already moving, her boots crunching over broken glass as she sprinted toward one of the cartel SUVs that hadn't been caught in the explosion. She yanked the door open, tossing aside a dead body slumped over the wheel. The keys were still in the ignition. Lucky her. "Tell me there's a shortcut," she said, slamming the door shut and firing up the engine. "Yeah," Jenkins replied, his voice calm but urgent. "There's an old access road about 3 miles ahead, cuts through the hills. If you push it, you can get ahead of him." Natalie didn't hesitate. She threw the SUV into gear, the tires screeching as she peeled away from the burning wreckage. The road was rough, uneven, the desert stretching endlessly around her. The dashboard lights flickered as she pushed the battered vehicle to its limits, the speedometer climbing. Jenkins' voice crackled again. "He's not alone. He's got another vehicle with him. Reinforcements." Natalie gritted her teeth. Of course he did. Ortega was too smart to run alone. He was a survivor, just like her. That made him dangerous. The SUV rattled violently as she tore across the uneven terrain, dodging scattered boulders and dips in the dirt road. The high beams cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust cloud trailing behind Ortega's truck. She could just make out the second vehicle behind him, another SUV, heavily armored. Jenkins' voice cut through the static. "You've got 30 seconds before they hit the highway. If they get to open roads, you're going to have a harder time catching them." Natalie pushed the gas pedal harder. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins, the old instincts kicking in. This was combat now, pursuit, engagement, elimination. She had spent years perfecting the art of the hunt, and Ortega had no idea that he was the prey now. The road forked ahead. The shortcut Jenkins mentioned loomed to the right, a steep incline cutting through the hills. It was risky, narrow, unstable, but if she took it, she could get ahead of Ortega before he hit the highway. She jerked the wheel to the right. The SUV skidded, tires struggling for grip as she tore up the incline. Rocks and dust kicked up behind her as the vehicle climbed the ridge, bouncing violently over the uneven ground. The truck groaned in protest, but she didn't let up. Her heart pounded as she neared the crest. The moment the SUV cleared the peak, she saw it, Ortega's truck just below her, barreling toward the main road. His backup vehicle was close behind him. Natalie didn't think. She acted. She gripped the wheel with one hand, reaching down with the other, and grabbing the grenade launcher she had stripped from one of the dead cartel soldiers back at the gas station. She swung open the driver's side window, resting the weapon on the frame, her eyes locking onto the target below. Ortega's second vehicle was positioned slightly to the left of his truck, trying to cover his escape. She took aim and fired. The grenade sailed through the air, spinning toward the road below. It hit the dirt just beneath the second vehicle's front tires, detonating on impact. The explosion ripped through the SUV, flipping it end over end before it slammed down onto its roof, metal screeching as it skidded across the road. Ortega's truck swerved violently, trying to avoid the wreckage, tires struggling for traction as he fought to regain control. Natalie didn't give him the chance. She cut the wheel, sending her own SUV hurtling down the hill toward him, dust and debris flying in her wake. The gap closed in seconds. Ortega saw her coming. He yanked the wheel, trying to shake her, but Natalie wasn't playing defense anymore. She slammed into the side of his truck. The impact sent them both spinning, tires screeching, metal twisting as they fought for control. Ortega's truck fishtailed, nearly flipping, before coming to a grinding halt just off the side of the road. Natalie barely had time to process before Ortega stumbled out of the truck, gun in hand. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, his face twisted in rage. She kicked her door open, stepping out, her own weapon raised. Ortega fired first, but she had already moved. She ducked, rolled, came up firing back. The bullets ripped through his shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground. She advanced slowly, gun still raised, watching as Ortega clutched his wound, his breathing ragged. Blood dripped from his fingers as he tried to reach for his weapon again. Natalie stepped forward and kicked the gun from his hand. He looked up at her, his face a mixture of pain and fury. "You don't know what you've done," he gasped. Natalie stared down at him, her face emotionless. "Oh, I know exactly what I've done." Ortega laughed, coughing up blood. "You think killing me will end this?" His voice was hoarse, but the amusement never left his eyes. "You don't know what's coming." She tilted her head slightly. "Enlighten me." He smirked, his teeth red with blood. "The cartel? They were never the real power. They were just tools. Pawns." Natalie narrowed her eyes. "Who's pulling the strings?" Ortega's smile didn't fade. He leaned forward slightly, whispering, "You're already dead, Agent Reyes." Then he lunged. She pulled the trigger before he could reach her, the final shot punching through his chest. His body jerked once, then fell still, his breath escaping in one last exhale. Silence. Natalie stood over the body, her pulse steady, her mind already turning over what he had said. Pawns, tools. If Ortega hadn't been at the top, then who was? A soft buzz from her pocket snapped her out of it. She pulled out her phone, Jenkins' name flashing on the screen. She answered. "It's done." Jenkins' voice was low. "Yeah, that's what I'm worried about." A chill ran down her spine. "Why?" "Because I just got intel. Ortega wasn't the final piece," Jenkins said grimly. "There's someone else, someone above him, and they know about you." Natalie stared at Ortega's lifeless body, then at the burning wreckage behind her. She thought she had ended this war. She was wrong. She exhaled, tightening her grip on the gun. "Then I guess I go hunting." The body of Luis Ortega lay still in the dust, the blood pooling beneath him, seeping into the cracks of the dry desert ground. His last words echoed in Natalie Reyes's mind, like a haunting refrain. "You don't know what's coming." She stood over him, the heat from the wreckage warming the back of her neck, the sharp scent of burning fuel filling the air. The desert stretched around her, quiet, watching. The cartel enforcer's words weren't a bluff. She had felt it, the sense that this wasn't just about drug smuggling or border crossings. Something bigger was lurking in the shadows. She clicked her radio, still breathing hard from the fight. "Jenkins!" His voice came through immediately, tense, urgent. "I'm here. You good?" She glanced down at Ortega's lifeless form. "Yeah, he's not." A pause. Then Jenkins exhaled. "I figured. But listen to me, Reyes. Ortega was a lieutenant. He wasn't calling the shots." She closed her eyes for a second, letting the weight of that settle. She had known. Deep down, she had known. Ortega had been too comfortable, too arrogant to be the one at the top. He was taking orders from someone else. Natalie crouched beside the body, ignoring the heat rising from the wreckage around her. She reached into Ortega's pocket, pulling out a burner phone. Its screen cracked from the impact. She pressed the power button. A few moments passed before it flickered to life. The lock screen was clean. No messages, no missed calls, but she wasn't stupid. This wasn't just some random cartel thug. This phone had been his lifeline to someone. "I've got his phone," she muttered. "I'll see what I can pull." "Good," Jenkins said, his voice clipped. "Because we just picked up something on our end. Intercepted a signal bouncing between a tower near you and a location deep in Juarez." Natalie's stomach clenched at the name. Juarez wasn't just another cartel-controlled city. It was a fortress, a war zone where drug lords, corrupt officials, and killers operated with total impunity. Jenkins continued, "That phone you're holding, it was transmitting coordinates. Someone was tracking Ortega's position before you put a bullet in him." Her grip on the phone tightened. So they know he's dead. Yeah, Jenkins confirmed, and they're gonna come looking. Natalie wiped sweat from her brow, glancing at the road leading back to the highway. If there were reinforcements, they weren't here yet. She had a window, but it was closing fast. I'm heading to Juarez, she said. Jenkins hesitated. Reyes, listen to me. That city isn't just dangerous, it's a goddamn hornet's nest. If the cartel is still running anything big, that's where it is. If Ortega's boss is there, he won't be sitting alone. I don't care. She turned, walking back toward the only working cartel vehicle still left standing. I need to end this. Another long pause. I figured you'd say that, Jenkins muttered. I'll send you what I have, but Reyes, this time, don't go in alone. She didn't respond. The radio went silent. Natalie climbed into the truck, her hands still trembling slightly from the fight. She took a breath, steadied herself, and started the engine. She had been running ops like this for years. She had walked into the fire before and come out alive. But something in the air told her this was different. This time, she wasn't just taking out another cartel boss. She was stepping into a war. The drive into Mexico was long, too long, giving her too much time to think. Her hands stayed steady on the wheel, but her mind churned. She had been a soldier before she became a border agent. She had seen what happened to men like Ortega, enforcers who thought they were untouchable, only to be thrown aside when they became liabilities. But what Ortega had said before she pulled the trigger, that had been different. You don't know what's coming. She had seen cartel operations before. She had seen high-level players make moves. But this was something else, something bigger. The thought lingered in her mind as she crossed the border, keeping a low profile. She had ditched the cartel truck outside of town, switching to something less conspicuous. An old sedan, stolen from a junkyard lot, stripped of anything that could link it back to her. Juarez at night was a different world. It pulsed with chaos, a city built on blood money, where the police were just another division of the cartel, and where the men in charge didn't hide in mansions or compounds. They walked freely through the streets because they owned them. Natalie kept her head down, driving carefully toward the coordinates Jenkins had sent her. A warehouse on the far side of the city, near the river. A distribution hub for the cartel's last standing network. She parked a block away, pulling the burner phone from her pocket again. She scrolled through Ortega's last received messages. One stood out. A single text. One word. Confirmed. She exhaled slowly. That was all she needed to know. Ortega had been reporting to someone, keeping them updated on something, possibly her movements, possibly something worse. She grabbed her gear from the passenger seat, strapping her sidearm to her thigh. The rifle was tucked in the trunk, hidden beneath a tarp. If this went loud, she would be ready. Natalie stepped out into the street, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The city was alive, music from nearby bars, the distant rumble of motorcycles, the occasional burst of laughter from street corners. But beneath it all, she could feel it, the weight of the place, the feeling that she had just stepped into the belly of the beast. She moved quickly, weaving through side streets, keeping to the shadows as she neared the warehouse. The building loomed in the distance, its rusted exterior blending into the decayed edges of the city. She crouched behind a parked car, scanning the perimeter. 3 guards outside, armed but not alert. Too easy. Natalie reached for her knife. It was time to get inside. She moved before they even knew she was there. The first guard didn't even have time to turn before the blade sliced across his throat, his body crumpling to the pavement. The second barely had time to react before she was on him, a quick strike to the ribs, the knife plunging deep. The third opened his mouth to shout, but she was already behind him. Her arm wrapped around his throat, the struggle lasting only seconds before his body went limp. She wiped the blade on his shirt, steadying her breath. Then she slipped inside the warehouse, into the lion's den. Whatever was waiting for her inside, she was ready. The interior of the warehouse was thick with the scent of gasoline, sweat, and desperation. The dim overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows across the rusted metal beams and concrete floors. Stacks of crates lined the walls, each stamped with unmarked serial numbers, the kind that spoke of high-level shipments, drugs, weapons, maybe worse. Natalie moved like a shadow, her body low, her steps silent. Her knife was still slick with blood, the grip warm in her hand. The 3 guards outside hadn't seen her coming, and neither would the men inside. That was their mistake. She pressed against a crate, scanning the large open floor. The space was massive, a hub of operations, and judging by the sound of voices echoing off the walls, it was far from empty. A group of men stood gathered near the center, their backs to her. They were arguing, their Spanish fast, clipped, urgent, nervous. They knew something was wrong. She caught pieces of the conversation. No response from Ortega. Should have been here by now. Something isn't right. They were expecting him? Natalie's eyes flicked toward the far side of the warehouse. A makeshift office, its windows covered with blacked-out plastic. If there was a leader here, someone giving orders, that was where they'd be. She exhaled slowly, steadying her heartbeat. She had to move fast. If they realized Ortega wasn't coming, if they put the pieces together before she got inside, the entire place would be on high alert. She moved along the edge of the crates, weaving through the shadows. The noise from the group helped mask her approach. She could see their weapons now. AR-15s, custom handguns, tactical vests. These weren't just cartel enforcers. These were mercenaries. That changed things. Natalie felt the shift in her gut. This wasn't just a smuggling operation. This wasn't just drugs or guns. This was something bigger. She needed to get to that office. A guard stood near the door, his back turned, a cigarette dangling between his fingers. She reached him in 2 steps, wrapping her arm around his throat, knife pressing deep into his side. His body jerked once, then went limp, the cigarette tumbling to the ground. She pulled him back into the shadows, silent, quick, clean. The voices from the group were getting louder now. They were starting to realize something was wrong. Natalie didn't have time to wait. She pushed open the office door. Inside, the room was dimly lit by the glow of multiple computer monitors. Maps covered the walls, pinned with red strings and photographs. Some of the images were familiar. Cartel lieutenants, known traffickers. But then she saw the others. FBI agents, DEA, Homeland Security, and her own photo. A cold chill rolled down her spine as she stepped closer. They had been watching her. A voice came from behind the desk. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Natalie's grip on her pistol tightened instantly. The man sitting in the chair was older, slick black hair, dressed in a gray tactical jacket, the kind worn by men who knew their way around both war zones and backroom deals. He leaned back, tapping a pen against the desk, his eyes calm, calculating. He wasn't surprised to see her. He had been expecting her. She leveled her gun at him. "Who the hell are you?" The man smirked, setting the pen down. "You already know the answer to that." Natalie scanned him, her instincts screaming that something wasn't right. "You're not Cartel." The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Number, I'm something much worse." The air shifted in the room, a weight pressing down on her. She knew this feeling. This was the part of the mission where things went sideways. Before she could react, the sound of boots pounding against the concrete outside the office door made her spin. Shit. The men outside had figured it out. The door slammed open and the first gunman stepped in. Natalie was already moving. She fired twice, dropping him before he could raise his weapon. The second man lunged, but she whipped the pistol across his face, sending him staggering backward. The third opened fire. Natalie dove behind the desk, bullets ripping through the walls. The older man had vanished, just gone. She cursed, gripping her pistol tight. It was a setup, a goddamn trap. She took a breath, forcing herself to think. This wasn't just an ambush, it was something else. They had her picture on the walls. They had files on her. They had known she was coming. Another burst of gunfire shredded the air, ricocheting off the metal cabinets behind her. Natalie pushed up from the floor, firing blindly toward the door, enough to make the attackers hesitate. Then she ran. She burst through the office window, glass exploding around her as she hit the ground hard. Pain shot up her ribs, but she kept moving. She sprinted across the warehouse floor, dodging between the crates as more gunfire erupted behind her. They were closing in. She reached the far end of the building, spotting the emergency exit. She slammed through it, emerging into the night air, heart pounding, sweat dripping down her back. Then she heard it. Engines, multiple vehicles, the roar of reinforcements arriving. Natalie cursed, ducking low behind a stack of shipping containers. She needed to get out. Now, she clicked her radio. "Jenkins, bad intel. This wasn't just a hub. They were expecting me. Jenkins' voice came back, tight with concern. How bad? They've got my file, my name, my photo, everything. She took a breath, eyes scanning the perimeter. This isn't just the cartel anymore. There's something else at play. Jenkins didn't speak for a moment. When he did, his voice was grim. Get out of there, Reyes, now. She was already moving, her body running on instinct and adrenaline. The road ahead was blocked. 2 black SUVs, their headlights blinding. A man stepped out of the lead vehicle, dressed in a black suit, his hands calmly folded in front of him. He wasn't Cartel. He wasn't a mercenary. He was something else. Natalie froze. He smiled. Agent Reyes, we've been waiting for you. Her stomach turned to ice. She had just walked into something far bigger than the cartel. And now, there was no way out. Pain spread through Natalie's ribs as she drifted back into consciousness. A dull throbbing behind her eyes made it hard to focus. And for a moment, all she could hear was the rhythmic hum of an engine. The scent of cigarettes, sweat, and gasoline hung thick in the air. Her hands were bound behind her back, zip ties cutting into her wrists. Her boots were gone. Her gear, her weapons, everything had been stripped away. She was in the back of a moving SUV. The memories came rushing in. The warehouse, the ambush, the men in black suits. She had fought, but there had been too many of them. A hit to the head had taken her down. A voice broke the silence, calm, controlled. Welcome back, Agent Reyes. Natalie forced her eyes open. Across from her, seated with a relaxed confidence that made her skin crawl, was the man from the warehouse, the one who had been waiting for her. He was older, mid-50s, dark suit, silver hair neatly combed back, his face marked by years of calculated decisions. Not a cartel thug, not a mercenary, something worse. I hope you don't take this personally, the man continued, adjusting his cuffs. But you've been making quite a mess of things. Natalie didn't respond. She shifted slightly, testing the restraints. No give. The man noticed and smirked. You're wasting your energy. Those ties will hold. He leaned back. But I admire your spirit. You've been a thorn in our side for months now. I almost feel bad that this has to end. She let out a slow breath, calming herself. Stay sharp. Find a weakness. Who the hell are you? She asked, her voice hoarse. The man tilted his head, amused. You're asking the wrong question. She stared at him, keeping her expression unreadable. He smiled. The question you should be asking is, why am I still alive? Her stomach twisted, but she didn't let it show. He was right. The cartel wouldn't have taken her alive. If this had been just another smuggling operation, she'd be dead already. That meant she wasn't a prisoner. She was a target for something bigger. The man crossed one leg over the other, his voice smooth, almost amused. My name is Daniel Mercer. You won't find that name in any files, but let's just say I've been watching you for a while. Natalie clenched her jaw. You're with the Cataract Group. Mercer nodded approvingly. Very good, though I prefer the term Global Investment Syndicate. Natalie let out a hollow laugh. You mean a network of criminals who hide behind governments and corporations? Mercer's smirk didn't waver. We operate where the world requires balance. Cartels? They were useful, but limited. You cut off their head, and they just grow back. But you're different. You don't stop. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping lower. That's why we brought you here, not to kill you, to offer you a job. Natalie froze, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. This wasn't an execution. It was a recruitment. The SUV came to a slow stop. The doors unlocked. 2 armed guards opened the doors and pulled her out. Natalie blinked against the sudden brightness of the floodlights overhead. They were in a private airstrip, miles away from civilization. A sleek private jet sat on the tarmac, engines humming softly. Mercer climbed out behind her, buttoning his jacket. I want you to understand something, Agent Reyes. He gestured toward the jet. There are 2 paths from here. One, you step onto that plane and we make you an offer, a real one, the kind you don't refuse. Natalie clenched her fists behind her back. And the second? Mercer sighed as if disappointed. You refuse, and I put 2 bullets in your head. You're too dangerous to leave alive. The guards flanked her, rifles ready. The desert air was cool against her skin, the smell of jet fuel mixing with the distant hum of crickets. Natalie looked at the jet, looked at Mercer. She had spent her life fighting people like him, but she needed time. She needed to get inside, find out more. She exhaled slowly. She wasn't done fighting. She nodded once. "Fine, I'll hear you out." Mercer smiled, satisfied. Good choice. But in her mind, Natalie knew the truth. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The jet's engines rumbled softly, a steady hum in the otherwise silent desert. Natalie Reyes climbed the stairs slowly, the weight of the zip ties on her wrists pressing against her skin like a brand. Two armed men flanked her, their eyes cold and unreadable. Mercer led the way, his gait relaxed, casual, like a man who had already won. Inside, the cabin was nothing like she expected. No military-grade equipment, no surveillance monitors. Instead, it was pure luxury. Cream-colored leather seats, polished wood panels, and soft golden lighting that made everything look expensive. A bottle of whiskey sat on the small table beside a file with her name on it. Mercer gestured for her to sit. Natalie hesitated for a second, then sank into the chair across from him, keeping her posture tense, ready. The guards took their places at the door. There was no escape, not yet. Mercer poured himself a drink, swirling the amber liquid before taking a slow sip. His eyes flicked to her wrists. "You can cut those now." One of the guards moved behind her, a knife flashing in the dim light. The plastic ties snapped, and Natalie flexed her fingers, the sting of circulation returning. She didn't thank them. Mercer smirked, as if amused by her silence. He set his glass down and pushed the file across the table. She didn't open it. "I assume you already know what's inside," he said smoothly. "Enlighten me," Natalie said, keeping her tone even. Mercer laced his fingers together. "Everything the Cataract Group has on you. Military records, special forces deployments, every mission, every kill." His eyes darkened slightly. "And of course, your transfer to border operations. A demotion, wasn't it?" Natalie's muscles tensed, but she didn't take the bait. Mercer continued. "We know why you took that job. We know about your past." He tapped the file. "Your father was DEA, wasn't he? Killed by the very cartel you've spent years dismantling." He let the words settle. "This isn't just about duty for you. It's personal." She didn't blink. Mercer smiled. "And that's why you're perfect for what we do." Natalie leaned forward slightly. "And what exactly is it that you do?" Mercer exhaled through his nose, like he was speaking to a child. "You think this war is about drugs and money. It's not. The world doesn't run on crime, Agent Reyes. It runs on control. The Cataract Group isn't just about smuggling shipments across borders. We decide who controls those borders." He lifted his glass again, taking another sip. "The DEA, the CIA, the cartels, they're all pieces on a chessboard. We move the pieces." Natalie felt the weight of his words, but she didn't react. Not yet. Mercer studied her, then leaned back. "This war doesn't end with bullets. It ends with power, and we're offering you a seat at the table." She let out a slow breath, feigning calm, even though her mind was already working through every possible outcome. "And if I say no?" Mercer's smile faded. "Then this plane lands in the middle of the Gulf, and you disappear forever." The words hung between them. There was no bravado, no threats, just certainty. Natalie let the silence stretch, watching him. He was confident, too confident. That was his weakness. She finally reached for the file, flipping it open. The pages were thick with redacted reports, surveillance photos, and lists of operations she had never even heard of. And there, buried beneath years of data, was one name that made her blood run cold. Jenkins. She barely stopped herself from reacting. Mercer's gaze sharpened. He saw the hesitation, the flicker of something beneath her expression. "Ah," he said, tilting his head. "That's the one, isn't it?" Natalie set the file down, keeping her face unreadable. "Why do you have a file on him?" Mercer smirked. "Because your friend isn't just some analyst. He's been feeding you information, hasn't he? Helping you chase ghosts." He picked up his glass again, swirling the whiskey. "Tell me, Reyes, did it ever occur to you that Jenkins might be playing you?" Natalie's pulse pounded, but she kept her expression still. Mercer leaned forward slightly. "We have eyes everywhere, Agent Reyes. We see everything. And Jenkins, he's been working both sides." She didn't believe it, couldn't. Jenkins was the only one who had ever had her back. He had given her intel, guidance, warnings. If he was compromised, if he had been feeding her false leads. Mercer saw the doubt creeping in and pressed harder. "We've been tracking his movements, his bank accounts. You think he's just an old war dog helping out an old friend?" He chuckled. "Number. He's been protecting someone, keeping you from getting too close." Natalie felt something in her chest tighten. Protecting who? Mercer took another sip, savoring the moment. Then he leaned in and whispered, "Himself." Her stomach dropped. Mercer smirked. "Jenkins has been on our payroll for years. He just never told you." The words hit her like a hammer, but she shoved the emotion down. She couldn't afford to react. Not now. Mercer exhaled, setting his glass down. "So, here's my offer." He spread his hands. "You work for us. You hunt the people we tell you to hunt. You make real change, not the meaningless battles you've been fighting." Natalie forced herself to breathe evenly. "And if I say no?" she asked again. Mercer smiled. "Then Jenkins dies." Her fingers curled into fists beneath the table. Mercer nodded like he had already won. "You think I'm bluffing?" He gestured toward the back of the plane. "We have him in a cell right now. He was picked up in Arizona 2 hours ago." Natalie's chest burned, but she didn't move. "You have 1 hour to decide," Mercer said, leaning back into his chair. "And Reyes?" She met his gaze. He smiled. "There's no escape from this. You either work for us, or you die with him." Natalie let out a slow breath, forcing herself to stay calm, stay in control. 1 hour. 1 hour to figure out how to kill every last one of them. She sat back, mirroring his smirk. "Mercer, you made one mistake." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "And what's that?" Natalie tilted her head, her voice soft, deadly. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." The air inside the jet was suffocating, thick with the scent of expensive whiskey and Mercer's arrogance. The engines hummed beneath them, steady and smooth, a cruel contrast to the storm brewing inside Natalie's mind. Her wrists burned where the zip ties had been, but she barely felt it. Her focus was locked onto Mercer, onto the way he leaned back in his chair, too comfortable, too confident, a man who believed he had already won. 1 hour. That's how long she had to figure out how to turn this around, how to escape, how to kill him, and every other son of a bitch who thought they could own her. Mercer watched her, swirling the amber liquid in his glass before taking another slow sip. "I can see it in your eyes," he said, voice smooth, measured. "You're still trying to figure out how to get out of this, how to beat me." He smirked, setting the glass down. "But there's no winning here, Agent Reyes. This isn't a mission. It's a recruitment." Natalie forced herself to breathe, keeping her expression unreadable. "And what makes you so sure I won't just put a bullet in your head?" Mercer chuckled, nodding toward the 2 guards standing by the exit, their rifles held low but ready. "Because you're not stupid. You know you wouldn't make it out alive." He leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes pinning her in place. "And because, if you try, Jenkins dies." Her fingers curled under the table. Jenkins. She didn't know if Mercer was bluffing. He could be playing her, trying to get inside her head. But she also knew the Cataract Group didn't bluff. She had to assume they had him, which meant she had to work fast. Natalie leaned back, exhaling slowly, forcing herself into a different mindset. The predator, not the prey. "Say I take the deal," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Say I work for you. What's the first job?" Mercer smiled. "Good. You're starting to understand." He reached into a drawer beneath the table, pulling out another file, this one thinner, lighter. He slid it across to her. Natalie hesitated for a fraction of a second before opening it. The first page nearly made her blood freeze. A photo of Jenkins, bound to a chair, blood on his face. Her stomach tightened. "You're going to kill him," Mercer said smoothly. Natalie kept her breathing even. "You just said you needed me to work for you." "I do." Mercer gestured to the file. "But you need to prove you're willing to let go of your past, that you're ready to work for us, not against us." Natalie stared down at the image, her mind racing. Jenkins was alive. That meant there was still a way out of this. Mercer leaned forward slightly. "You're a soldier, Reyes. You understand orders, sacrifices. He's compromised. He's a liability. You eliminate him, and we wipe your slate clean. New identity, new clearance, no more running." Natalie slowly lifted her gaze. "And if I refuse?" Mercer sighed, almost like he was disappointed. "Then he dies anyway. But so do you." He leaned back again, tapping his fingers against the table. "And frankly, I'd rather have you on my side." Natalie looked back down at the file, pretending to consider it, even though her decision had already been made. She just needed time. She had to get off this plane. She closed the file and met Mercer's gaze again. "Fine, take me to him." A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. Smart choice. He gestured to the guards. "Prep for landing. We'll be touching down in 10. Natalie exhaled slowly, her mind already putting the pieces together. 10 minutes. That was all she had to turn the tables. The plane touched down on a private airstrip, miles away from any major city. The moment the wheels hit the ground, Natalie knew she was running out of time. The guards motioned for her to stand, but she didn't move immediately. She needed to assess, to wait. Mercer stood first, adjusting his jacket. "Don't do anything stupid now, Reyes. You made your choice." She forced a smirk. "Yeah, I did." They moved toward the exit, the guards flanking her as the hatch hissed open, revealing the dim glow of overhead floodlights outside. The night air was warm, thick with the scent of fuel and dirt. She stepped down the ramp, her eyes scanning the surroundings. High fences, guard towers, armed men at every entry point. A blacked-out van was parked nearby, waiting. Jenkins was inside. She knew it. Her heart pounded as they approached. Mercer walked ahead of her, nodding to one of the guards. "Bring him out." A few seconds later, the van doors swung open and two men dragged Jenkins out. His face was bruised, dried blood on his temple. But his eyes locked onto Natalie's, sharp, aware. She saw it immediately. The slight nod, the flicker of his fingers, a signal. Jenkins had a plan. She had to move. Now Natalie acted before Mercer could react. She spun on her heel, driving her elbow into the throat of the guard closest to her. The man stumbled back, choking. She grabbed his gun before it even hit the ground, pivoting and firing 2 rounds into the second guard's chest before he could lift his rifle. Mercer's face twisted in rage. "Shoot her!" But Natalie had already moved. Jenkins lunged at the man holding him, knocking him off balance just as Natalie took down the next guard. The air erupted with gunfire. Jenkins ripped a pistol from the downed guard, firing off shots as Natalie sprinted toward the van. She threw open the driver's side door, climbing inside. "Get in!" she yelled. Jenkins didn't hesitate. He dove into the passenger seat as bullets ripped through the windshield, shattering the glass. Natalie floored the gas. The van lurched forward, tires spinning, smoke kicking up behind them. "Where the hell are we?" Jenkins shouted, reloading his gun. "Somewhere we're not supposed to be," Natalie growled, gripping the wheel as she swerved, avoiding another barrage of bullets. The airstrip was ahead, a security gate, guarded. "We're gonna crash through," she said. Jenkins gave a sharp laugh, shaking his head. "You always did have a flair for dramatics." The gate was coming up fast. Behind them, Mercer's men were mobilizing, piling into vehicles. They had seconds before the chase began. Natalie tightened her grip, her breath steady. "This ends tonight," she muttered. Then she slammed her foot down on the gas. The van hit the gate at full speed, metal crumpling on impact. And just like that, they were free. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. The van bucked violently as it tore through the chain-link fence, the metal screaming as it twisted and snapped under the force of impact. Natalie gritted her teeth, hands locked onto the wheel as the vehicle lurched forward, tires skidding across the dirt road beyond the compound. She could hear the roar of engines behind them. Mercer's men were already in pursuit. "How many?" she barked, keeping her eyes on the dark, open road ahead. Jenkins twisted in his seat, peering through the shattered rear windshield. His voice was tight. 3 SUVs, full crew, armed. Of course they were. The Cataract Group didn't half-ass anything. They wouldn't be sending men just to capture them. This was an execution. Bullets tore through the back of the van, punching holes through the metal, sending sparks flying inside the cabin. Natalie jerked the wheel, skidding hard around a bend, the tires barely gripping the loose gravel. The terrain ahead was rough, a mix of sand, rock, and dry brush, leading into the hills. If they made it there, they might have a chance to shake their pursuers. "Can this thing take a hit?" she asked, shifting gears aggressively. Jenkins let out a breathless laugh. "If by hit, you mean another 5 minutes of this shit, then yeah." He reached for the rifle slung beside him, checking the magazine. "We need to take them out before they box us in." Natalie glanced at him. "Then start shooting." Jenkins didn't hesitate. He twisted around, bracing himself against the dashboard as he leaned out the window, rifle raised. The first SUV closed the gap, its headlights glaring like the eyes of a predator locked onto its prey. The rifle barked, the shot cracking through the night. The windshield of the pursuing vehicle exploded inward, the driver slumping against the wheel. The SUV veered sharply, skidding sideways before flipping into a violent roll, tumbling across the dirt road in a shower of dust and shattered glass. "One down," Jenkins called. Natalie didn't have time to celebrate. The second SUV rammed into the back of the van, the impact sending them swerving wildly. She fought for control, hands tightening on the wheel as she brought the vehicle back on course. "They're trying to force us off the road." Jenkins reloaded. "Then let's make that real hard for them." The third SUV pulled up alongside them, a gunman hanging out the window, his rifle aimed. Natalie saw him too late. The burst of gunfire shredded the side of the van, bullets ripping through metal, the side mirror exploding into pieces. Jenkins returned fire, his shots punching into the attacker's chest, sending him tumbling onto the dirt road. But the SUV kept coming. Natalie's mind worked fast. They couldn't keep playing defense. They needed to finish this. Her gaze flicked to the terrain ahead, a stretch of jagged rocks and uneven dirt leading toward a steep drop. The perfect place for an ambush. "Hold on!" she shouted. She slammed the brakes, the tires screaming as the van skidded sideways, forcing the pursuing vehicle to swerve to avoid a collision. The moment the enemy SUV pulled ahead, Natalie punched the gas again, ramming the side of their vehicle with full force. The impact sent the Cartel's truck spinning out of control, its tires losing traction on the loose dirt. It hit a rock at high speed, the force launching it into the air before it plummeted off the edge of the road, flipping twice before erupting in flames. The shockwave of the explosion sent a rush of heat through the air. Jenkins exhaled, eyes wide as he stared at the fireball in the distance. "Jesus, Reyes, remind me to never piss you off." Natalie didn't respond. She was already looking at the last SUV, the final threat. Mercer. The lead vehicle had stayed back, watching, waiting. Now, as the flames of the wreckage burned behind them, Mercer's SUV sped up, its high beams cutting through the darkness like twin knives. Natalie gritted her teeth. "He's not running. He wants to finish this." Jenkins chambered another round. "Then let's finish it." Natalie jerked the wheel, turning off the road, heading straight toward the rocky hills ahead. Mercer followed. The vehicles bounced over the uneven terrain, dust and loose stones kicking up in thick clouds behind them. Natalie could feel it, the end closing in. There was no more running, no more waiting. It was time. She saw the cliff's edge ahead, the sheer drop into the canyon below. If they could force Mercer to overshoot. The first impact came hard, Mercer's SUV ramming into their rear bumper, trying to force them off course. "Son of a bitch!" Jenkins shouted, nearly losing his grip on his rifle. Natalie fought for control. The van skidded, wheels spitting dirt. Mercer rammed them again, harder this time. "Brace!" she yelled. The van hit a rock formation, the impact sending them into a wild spin. Mercer took the opening. His SUV pulled up alongside them, the passenger window rolling down. Natalie barely had time to react before a barrel was pointed directly at her. A split-second decision. She jerked the wheel, hard. The van slammed into Mercer's truck. The force sent his vehicle tilting, tires slipping over the edge of the canyon. Mercer's expression flashed from rage to realization. He had lost. The SUV teetered for half a second, then plummeted. Natalie slammed the brakes, tires screeching as the van came to a halt just feet from the edge. She watched as Mercer's vehicle disappeared over the cliff, tumbling into the dark abyss below. The explosion came a second later, a fireball erupting from the canyon floor. Silence. Only the sound of the wind rushing through the canyon remained. Jenkins exhaled, slumping back in his seat. "Tell me that was the last of them." Natalie didn't answer right away. She climbed out of the van, stepping toward the edge, peering down at the burning wreckage far below. Mercer was dead. The Cataract Group had lost its grip on her world. It was finally over. For the first time in what felt like years, she let herself breathe. Jenkins walked up beside her. "So, what now?" Natalie stared at the flames below, the embers floating into the night sky. Then she turned back to the horizon, where the first hint of dawn was breaking. She had been fighting for so long, running, chasing, killing, but now she was free. She exhaled and started walking toward the van. "Now," she said, voice steady, "we go home.